Okay, done. Okay, cool. I want to start by saying that I have good and bad news. Bad news is my talk is now, but the good news is that there will be food after my talk. So it's just 30 minutes of pain for very good Italian food. So it's going to be okay. Okay, so today we're going to talk about bowling. And I just want to show this picture that I think is very important. I saw on Twitter today, and Eric has told me to do it, so yeah. Joking, okay. My talk is called GraphQL All the Things. My name is Sara. Let's start with the introductions. My name is Sara. I'm originally from Portugal, but I am currently living in the beautiful weather city of Berlin. Yeah, I make very weird choices in my life. I'm a developer advocate at YLD, and the definition that I usually give as a developer advocate in my case, because I work for consultancy, is that I learn things to be able to teach people things. Not always useful things, but I'm really into horrible movies, like Sharknado and movies like that. Like, I don't know why. Watching people fail on screen gives me life, because I'm not the only one failing. I don't know. And like a true Portuguese person, I'm really into football, because that's all we got. I really love GraphQL. Like, I know there are a lot of people who chose like really cool things to love, like Internet of Things and how they build really cool things with it, and I make servers. But yeah, we all make choices, I guess. So I really love GraphQL. Like, GraphQL is bae. You can't see very well, but I'm using this T-shirt that says "Ask me about GraphQL" and a GitLab jacket, and this is a true representation of who I am when I'm on vacation. And I'm going to talk about managing local state with Apollo. Who in here has used GraphQL on the front end or back end or whatever? Okay, cool. Out of these people, who is using anything else than Apollo? What are you using? Sorry, I didn't mean to call you out, but... Oh, okay, cool. Never used it, actually. Skip that part. Not sure if it was a good idea or a bad idea, but okay, I'm going to talk about managing local state with Apollo. And the first thing that I want to point out is that it's an alert, and I want to just say that I don't really like Redux. I don't. I started using Redux when I started using React, and I didn't quite understand React or Redux when I did it. And like the first 2 weeks were great until I started understanding that I was changing 4 files to change an object, and I got real pissed. But like proper Latin pissed. And I was like, I'm never fucking using this again. I don't like this. What are you doing to my life? I just want to point out that I've met Dan Abramov on several occasions. He's the nicest human being ever. He is so kind and nice. I just don't like Redux. Dan's great, though. I love Dan. Everyone loves Dan. Okay, and one thing that I get a lot, since I work in a consultancy and we have a ton of client projects and everything, one thing that I get a lot from being a developer that can like just help people around projects, and I get this thing like, hey, Sara, we are working on this awesome React project that is all Apollo and GraphQL. There's an L missing. Great. GraphQL. Do you want to help? And I'm like, wait, that sounds really cool. Like, that sounds like a really cool project for me to help. Like, what do you use for state management? And like, that person always looks me dead in the eye, and he's like, Redux. No, once they said MobX, and I was better. I was like, Redux. And I'm like, why? Why would you do this? Like, just GraphQL all the things. You can actually do this. So there is a package called Apollo Link State. It was made, I think, beginningly was made by Peggy Raises, who works for Apollo, and then it's maintained by the entire Apollo team. And God bless the Apollo team. And what this package does is allows you to manage local state with when you're using Apollo. It allows you to manage local state with that. And if you're already using GraphQL in your application, this allows for you to not have the mentality change and like go from writing GraphQL queries to writing reducers or something like that, whatever you're using, which I really like. So first question that you have is probably like, how? Okay, so there are 3 packages that you need to install, but these are the packages that you install usually. So you have Apollo Boost, which is the new version of all the things. So when Apollo version 1 came out, they had 1 package, and then version 2 came out, and they had 20 packages. And then they did Apollo Boost, which combines all the packages into 1 package, so you don't have to cry anymore. It's great. And then they install React Apollo, because you're using React with it, and GraphQL, because you're using GraphQL. That's about it. Okay, so this is how the Apollo client works in general. So it uses the context API as well, and you have an Apollo provider that you import from React Apollo. Weirdly enough, it's not the default import. And you create a new Apollo client, and then you pass that client in through the beginning of your app. Okay, cool. So So that's set up. It actually doesn't do anything, but let's add some state and some URI. So there are a couple of things that you, in the beginning, should add to Apollo. The first one is a URI. So the URI is the URL. I don't know. They named the URI for the GraphQL endpoint that you want to call and get stuff from. And then by default, Apollo Boost brings in client state. And client state has two things. It has defaults, it asks for defaults, and it asks for resolvers. And you're probably wondering, what the fuck is that? I got you, fam. So defaults are your base state. So you have this in Redux, you have this in MobX, you have this in set state. I mean, you actually don't have to have this in set state, but I would tell you to have this in set state. And this is what you start with. So it's your base state for your entire application. And in this case, I'm just going to open and close a modal for sake of simplicity and because everyone loves modals and because everyone had to build them for GDPR. So you have defaults, and that's an object. God love GDPR. Got so many emails. It was great. Okay, so modal, and inside of it, there is open that defines if the modal is open or closed, and you also give it a type name. This is a thing that when you get from the client, Apollo tries to do it for you, but it's really nice for Apollo to have this in order to maintain, like, know what the fuck is going on in your app. Like, what the fuck is this? And it's just like, oh, type name modal. Oh, this is a modal. Okay. So if you create another object, just give it another type name. You're probably never going to use this, but this is for Apollo to keep their cache under control. So you don't have to write cache. And there's the resolvers. Okay, so this is kind of where the magic happens. So who has built GraphQL servers on the back end in Node or whatever? Okay, same exact thing for all of you. For the people who now raise their hands. So the resolvers are basically when you get something from a REST API. And for example, imagine this is a backend. You get something from a REST API, and you have like a pure function. It can not be a pure function, but yeah. You return something else that will be returned in the GraphQL API. So it's just literally a function that gets something and returns something else. In this case, we're not going to get it from a REST API. We're going to get it from the Apollo cache. Because every time you do something, what the Apollo state is actually doing under the scenes is just storing everything in their cache, like they do for everything that you get from a GraphQL API. So in this case, so the resolvers can take queries and mutations. By default, the queries, I actually didn't have to write a lot of queries because by default you can search through everything that's in your default state or in your state in general. So only if you want to do some weird stuff with your queries do you have to make that. And mutations, and so you create a mutation for open modal, and you get 3 parameters with that. And the first parameter is the parent that in 99% of the cases you will never use. I've used this once, and just to explain kind of what the parent is, so if you use MongoDB and you use GraphQL, MongoDB returns with _ID for some reason. It never returns ID. And so you can use the parent, you can say like ID, you can use query and then the ID and then say like ID equals ID, basically, _ID equals ID, and you get the parent to say parent.id. So it's never used, basically, unless you're using MongoDB. And then you get all the parameters that you sent here. And the third one is basically all the data that you may need or not need or want or not want. And from that, you're usually just going to get the cache. And so you get the cache, and you say that I want this modal to be open to be equal to true. So you create the data, and you say, OK, in the data, I want modal is open true. And the type name, I want to set the exact same type name. That's fine. And then you say like cache.write data, and just you pass the data that you want to write to the cache. If you want to change a particular query, for example, you also have cache.write query. You pass it the query, and you pass it the data. So yeah, you can do both of these things. I've been told that it's a good practice to just return null, because you're not actually returning anything. So function is supposed to return something, but you're not actually returning anything, so return null. Yeah, that's about it. And now let's actually try and get the mutation in GQL language. So the first thing that you need to do is to import GQL from Apollo Boost. GQL stands for GraphQL Query Language, which I did not know for way longer than I cared to say. I was actually told that in a workshop. I was like, oh, this GQ import GQL. I don't know what the fuck that means. And the dude in the back was like, GraphQL Query Language. I was like, I think I should have known what that means. And you just export default a new query, a new mutation, and you call the mutation open modal. You can name it whatever you want. You can name it Verona. You can name it chicken shortage. You can name it whatever you want. And out of that, we just want open modal. So if you go back, we just want this, basically. Oh no, I'm just, yeah. So we just want this, and the names match perfectly to what we said in the resolvers, which is really nice. And then there's that weird add client. So what an add client does is it basically tells Apollo to not go to the server. So usually what Apollo does is that it first searches your cache, and if it's not in your cache, it will go to the server. But if you said add client, it will error out and never try to go to the server, which is very useful. Yeah. So now let's build a query. So getting the actual things from the state. So you create a query and you call it MODAL. I want to point out that you don't have to actually name your queries. It's very useful for DevTools, and you actually don't have to specify query because that's a default. So you can literally just delete this. But yeah, you can do that. Not saying I support it, but you can. And then you say, okay, I want the modal. So basically what this returns, imagine that this returns the entire object of your state. And you say, of the object of the state, I want the modal. Cool. And you say, I want to get this from the client. I don't care. I don't give a fuck about the server. And inside of that, I want to get this open. If you have more stuff in it, you can get whatever you want. You can get the type name. But in this case, all that I care about is that if the modal is open or closed. Cool. So we made the behind the scenes, but we actually didn't make anything because it doesn't work. We're not calling it. It's just we made GraphQL queries. That's what I live for. So let's talk about the query component. So I have nothing against high order components, but I fucking love the query components and the mutation component. So when I think it was Apollo 2.1 or 2.2, correct me after lunch if I'm wrong, but after lunch. But there was these new query components that use render props. And we've been through render props. And so you import query from React Apollo. There's also a mutation and a subscription. Mutations are to change, and subscriptions are more for chats and stuff. I've used them twice to see how they worked. So you get a couple of stuff here. So you deconstruct all of that stuff because you technically get one thing, but that's not cool. So you get loading, error, and you get your data. So the data is, in this case, everything that we get here. So is basically modal and then is open, because this is just like an object. Imagine this as an object that you deconstruct. So you get data and then you just deconstruct the modal because that's all that you want. And the good thing about this is that it automatically checks if it's loading and if there's an error. So you can just say, if it's loading, just return loading. If there's an error, just return error and show off the error. If none of these things happen, that means that we can continue, and then there is data, and we can show the modal. And we say, okay, modal, and if this is using React modal, so we just say if is open equal to modal that is open, and that is false. So the modal won't open. But the thing about this is that I also do not like to write a lot of if statements in my render functions, mostly in all of them if I'm doing query components. And also, this is kind of a lot of code to be writing in every single file that you have to get something from anywhere. Either that be an API or either that be the state. So the one thing that we can do is that, so I have one file, like I think it's like on Code Sandbox or something, that's just a query component that I created. I just copied everything, basically. So you can just get the Apollo query component and create your own and make it a lot smaller. So first thing that I want to point out is that this will assume that you're using the same loading and the same error for every part of your app, which you should. If you're not, talk to your designer. So you create a query component and you just get all the props, and the only prop that you actually care about that is different from the others in this case is the children. So you get all the props, you do the query with those props, so you pass everything down, just fuck that, get everything, and then you check if it's then you get loading, error, and data. And what you do is that you check if it's loading or if it's an error here. So you don't have to do it in your actual components, like in your actually like 20 components that have to do queries. And then you return the children and pass it the data. So it works the exact same way on your side. So it's just basically, this is how to create a render prop. Children, the thing inside, function as a child. I don't know. So you just return the children as a function. And when you do this, someone's taking, there we go. So when you do this, you can actually make the code look like this. Because you can now just use your own query instead of using GraphQL, Apollo queries. And you can just say, okay, query, get modal, and like I said, everything gets passed down automatically. So if you had variables and if you had other stuff, it will all get passed down automatically to the query component. And then all you get is the data. So inside of here, as you can see, I'm not deconstructing anything. I'm not deconstructing the data. I'm just getting modal, and it's open. And that makes it a lot smaller and a lot more feasible to be used in a lot of components. So that's good. We made our code smaller. That is great. Everyone likes smaller code. Abstractions. So this is an abstraction. God damn it, it's so fits on one slide. That's pretty good. But there is actually no modal because the default is false. So we actually need to change the state in order to change the modal, to show the modal. It's the first time that I've seen anyone like paying attention to anyone talking about modals. It's like, modals, and like, yes. The mutation component. The mutation component allows you to change things on your state at the top of your app, basically. And so this is how the mutation component works. And so you import mutation from React Apollo. And in this case, you only get two arguments, but the first argument is just the name of the function. So there's not a lot of arguments that you need to pass, that you need to get, and that you need to deconstruct out of, and all of that stuff. So you get the name of the function, and this is how we call the mutation in the beginning of the presentation. So all the names match exactly. So you know what you're going to get, and you know what names things are, because they're exactly the name of the mutations and everything. So what you do is you on-click, you do open modal. And as you saw, I'm not passing any arguments, so you'll just set it to true, because I don't care about the parameters in the other thing. So when I click this, the modal will open. But you may still think that this is too much code, because you've never used Bootstrap or something, I don't know. So you may still think that this is too much code. And there is actually easier ways to accomplish something like this if it's a really small thing. And I think it's something that is worth mentioning. So there is a thing called the Apollo consumer, and this is used for, and listen to me, used for very simple mutations to the cache, but like very simple mutations. Do not use this as state management, please. I mean, you can. Let me know how that goes. So you have Apollo consumer and React Apollo, and what the Apollo consumer is basically just a component that returns you the cache. So you can literally just write to the cache. So the mutation that you did can completely be erased, and you can just say on click, cache that write data, and you pass in all of the data that you want to write to this cache, which is cool. And that's about all that you need to do. And exactly, so the mutation is done on the fly, because if you think about it, this is exactly what we, not the on click, but this is exactly what we did in the mutation. So we're just doing it on the spot, which may be a good idea for small things, but not for like huge ass applications. Okay, so next question is like, can you make the query and mutation component fit in one slide? This is not proper English. Watch me. Okay, so the font is smaller, as you may have noticed. So this is the query that you have. So you have a query of modal, and of there you get the client, and it's open. Next thing the next actual thing that you get in the query component is the cache, which they have called client. But that's the cache. I promise. I tried. There's a demo. So you get data and you get the clients. So that means that you can write cache. So you can write cache. You can write data to the cache, not cache. I mean, you can also write caches if you want. Don't do that. Okay, cool. Yeah. And so you can just write to the cache on button click, because you already get the cache. And on the modal, you just check if it's open with data that modal is open. And you can fit all of this into one slide, which is really cool. And also, you're not just using the Apollo consumer, so you're basically doing the mutation here, but the query is a completely normal query. So you can do this as well. Yeah, as you can. Also, I want to point out one thing that so there's usually also a thing loading and errors, but 99% of the times you're not going to use this in a polling state. There's not actually going to be a loading. There may be an error, but no loading. But the thing about this is that the modal doesn't close. So if you look at this code, I can open it, but I can't close it. So it's just like medium. No one wants that. So fine, let's close the modal. So in this case, I actually made the code smaller, which is kind of amazing. But I have a change state function, which basically just writes data to the cache with the value that you pass to it. So if you pass true, it will say modal open equals true. If you that's exactly how it works. If you pass chicken shortage, it will say modal open equals chicken shortage. And you can check for that and sew an Easter egg. I don't know. So you get a query. And you get the data, and you get the client, and on request close is a function from React Modal that you can call. That's not bad. So you can call, and when you click outside of your modal, it will do whatever you want on request close. So in this case, I'm changing the state to false, and that's about it. So when you click the button, it changes to true, and it triggers a new re-render, and then it will open the modal, and when you click outside, it says change state of the client to false, and you will just close the modal. So I have a demo of this. It's on Code Sandbox. I will also share the links to the slides to this presentation when I finish the presentation. No, I actually think there's a link at the bottom. Doesn't matter. So I have a demo about this, and now I just wanted to talk about some new things that are coming in Apollo for the new version of Apollo for version 3, which are things that I'm excited about, because I fucking love Apollo, because God bless them. They saved my sanity. So one thing that I had a couple of problems with is that Apollo Boost, when you install it, doesn't allow you to change the cache. And who has used Apollo on server-side rendered apps? It's weird. It's weird. Okay, so you need to like put some global window object on your HTML and then get that and make the cache that. But since you couldn't change the cache in Apollo Boost, you had to install all of the packages. So now Apollo Boost supports server-side rendering, which is really good because you can change the cache. You can also change it for another cache if you want. Apollo Link State is going to be a part of the Apollo client on 3.0, so it's going to be fully merged with that. At the beginning, it was mostly an experiment, but a lot of people started using it, so it's going to be merged into Apollo clients, which is really good. So that makes this talk not useless, which is great. So easier installs like Apollo Boost, the thing that I used here, will be the default in version 3. So when you install React Apollo client, it will install something like Apollo Boost, instead of you having to install 10 other things. So if you want to plug in more things, you do that. But that's an extra step, not the first step is to install 10 things, which I think is really nice. Yay. There's also an Apollo CLI, which allows you to get types and everything for your Apollo things if you use this. So types, and there's a video of showing. You fuck with me, boy. Oh, great. There was a video. Do I not have internet? Oh, I don't. Oh yeah. So no? Is it working? Is it the same problem? Can we cut this on the video of the talk? Oh yeah. So my I'm just gonna say like my computer. Oh no, it's not. It's fixed. It's not fixed probably. Okay, so my computer has a problem in which if I plug an HDMI cable, the internet dies. And I'm not sure why this happens. I guess I'll never know. I thought it was the adapter, but apparently it's not. What? Just looking at my porn, dude. They're all just looking at my porn. So basically, yeah, so this happens on my computer. It started happening after I updated to Mojave, so I'm just going to let everyone know that this is a thing now. This is a thing. This is another thing that you need to take care of, because as you can see, like, it fakes internet, but there's no internet. So how can I explain this without a video? So basically, what this does is that if you have a huge query, so you have like all of your queries and everything, you can run the Apollo CLI, and the Apollo CLI will generate TypeScript definitions for you, which if you're using TypeScript is really good. Yeah, so it will generate TypeScript definitions for you. You can also watch your files. So when you actually change that file, it will generate new TypeScript definitions for you. So if you're using TypeScript, you can rest assured that this will be a really good thing to accompany it, because it's really hard to, like, you're not going to type GQL things, so now you actually can, which is really nice. And the video. So there's also, video's great, right? I swear, guys, if I take this off, it will work immediately. But then I'll plug it in and it's the same. So there's also going to be a new thing called opt-in schema validation. So the thing about schema validation is that it requires a GraphQL.js library, which is fucking huge. So you don't want to load that in your browser just to get schema validation. So when you do a client state, you can't actually say, like, I want this to be a string. Like, you can want this to be a string, but it's not going to do anything. If it's a number, it's not going to error out because it doesn't have schema validation. So the next versions, they're going to create an opt-in that on production, it will just be, it will not do anything. It will just be removed so that you don't have to load GraphQL.js into your project, because it's a huge thing. But I think this is also a really good thing. If you already have this on the back end, it will just be, you will just include, this like a common thing that you will include in your back end and your front end, and it's really nice. You can also install this today. It's actually available from, I think, about a month ago. So you can npm install -g Apollo or yarn global add or yarn add global. I can never remember which one. So npm install -g Apollo. And yeah, that's my talk. And you can find all of the slides at gql/all/things.now.sh. And you can go now for food.